Hello, PY.
Hello, Mitch.
Hey, this is actually sort of surreal for me. I when I started working at Square, one of the things that I said to myself that I really want to make sure that I do is get you on a podcast. So
Cool.
thank you for doing that.
Well done.
Also, something else that was very surreal, which probably seemed like nothing to you, but when I started doing that performance related work, and you were like helping me get started, and you were helped me a lot. Really, there was a lot of because I knew absolutely nothing, and just like I'd post a question at the end of the day. And I remember, or even really early in the morning. So I usually start at 7 a.m. I think you usually start around 8 or something like that, based on when I saw you come on.
Haha, there's a secret to that. I start on my phone, and I'm not actually at the desk usually when I start working because I'm kind of in between
Oh, okay.
things, kids and everything.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because I remember I posted a question really early about some performance thing, and you were like, haha, nothing like a good old performance investigation in the morning. And you like just jumped into it. I think you probably stuck with me for like an hour, like trying to figure this thing out.
Yeah, I get really excited about those things, and you had an interesting problem, so it's really cool to look into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of the problems are interesting. It's always like a little sort of puzzle to try and solve. Okay, so let's. I want to start by talking about. Some people might know you, some people might not know you. Funny enough, actually, the first time I followed you on Twitter, like years ago, I thought you were a Python developer because of your name, Pi,
Yeah,
because the Python files are .py,
yeah.
and I also called you Py. Or wait, no, I called you Pi instead of Py. Like if anybody ever asked me about you, I'd say, oh yeah, Pi. But I know you actually go by Py, right?
Yeah, I do. I go by PY. Well, my name is Pierre-Yves, but it's hard to pronounce and it's long. And so I think since high school, actually even in France, where I'm originally from, people called me PY. Um,
Hmm.
and a couple funny stories there. Obviously, having the username PY is cool, but depending on the tools, when people mention Python, you get pinged. Like there used to be a thing at Square and in the before we had Slack. Every time a Python script would be pasted in somewhere, someone would say like, "Run the init Python script." That would ping me. So it was annoying.
That's funny.
And then yeah, the name thing, I try to put it very um, like our CEO Jack Dorsey has called me Pi in front of the whole company, so I had to correct him. But
Oh,
he's still,
really?
I don't think he's learned yet. But yeah,
Well, that's okay though. Like I think Py or Pi sounds. I like the sound of pie also,
I
but
like
I
the
mean,
taste of pie
if
for
you,
sure.
yeah, but if you prefer PY, then that's, I guess, what we got to go with. Yeah. So anyway, so some people may not know you, but some people do. You're quite influential in the Android space. You've developed or helped develop, and probably in some cases completely developed some very popular libraries. You've worked at Square for many years. What are some of the just so some of the people who don't know, what are some of the libraries that you've helped build or you have built?
So the main, I think the one that I guess is the most popular one that I entirely built is Canary. So this one, I mean, I maybe wrote 99% of the code. We've had many contributors over the years, but I wrote the original version and I've been maintaining it ever since. So Canary is a library that you add to your app. It's just a debug implementation library, and it automatically detects leaks. Shows a notification and tells you, hey, you have a memory leak. Here's the memory leak, and it helps you fix that. So it's great for if you have out of memory errors in your app, or ANRs sometimes are caused by running out of memory. So fixing those memory leaks helps with that. I've helped with some other libraries. I've been involved in some Dagger stuff. I've touched on Retrofit and OKHTP here and there, but very minor. I think my biggest contribution has been Canary, and then some newer libraries that are more like smaller focused libraries. One for Logcat, one for which is called Logcat, one called Curtains, which is a library to help with dealing with Android windows. So there's no API in Android to say, give me all the windows that my app is managing. So I made an API for that. And then there's one called Papa, which is performance of Android production applications. So it's a library for measure. It's kind of a performance MISC tools library. Like it's got a bunch of random things related to Android performance.
Cool.
And then before Square, Android annotations was the big one for people who were doing Android development around 2010, something like that. I made a library at the time called Android Annotations, which was the first Java annotation processor for Android. So
very cool. So how did you get into you're most well known for performance work for sure. At least that's my perception. How did you get into performance work? What brought you into that? And also, how did you get so good at it? Because there's not a lot of information out there.
There's not,
you know,
and I don't.
There's
yeah, go ahead.
Even if you go to the Android documentation, there's very little. There's a little bit about the profiler, and it's very hard to read. And performance stuff is so nuanced. Like it depends on the use case. Every investigation is different. So I guess it is like by default difficult to show someone how to do it because every scenario is different. But yeah, like how did you get into it and get so good?
Thank you. First of all, thank you. I didn't realize I was known for that. I think this is a transition that I've done maybe in the last 2 years. So I've always been somewhat interested and then paying attention but before I used to do a lot of product work. So, build UIs and stuff. And I knew a number of basics about performance, but, I would watch a presentation from Google I/O where they're like, here's the systrace, and be like, I have no idea how to use that. I'd be very confused by. And also every time I watched the talk, it seemed cool, but it seems very specific. Like the stupid example that you're blocking the main thread. It's very obvious, but real life is never that obvious, right? And I think what happened is I think 3 years ago I was switching roles and I was like, hey, I want to work on the foundational stuff at Square, like the core stuff, and I want to help with crashes in performance because no one's taking care of that. We sort of it was a shared duty, but there was no one trying to think about those problems and make those problems go away or make them easier to solve. So I just decided, I didn't just decide. I made it my role. I found someone to agree with that this would be my role, and then I started using the profiler. I was like, I want to understand what's happening in the app, and that's basically it. It's like So one key thing was having a lot of time to do this and then realizing that there's not a lot of content, not a lot of training, and just trying to figure out and talking to a bunch of people at Google. I've had a lot of help from Googlers and then investigating one performance problem after another and realizing the thing that happens, especially when you start, the thing that happens every time is you're like, okay, like I see a problem on my screen. What can I do? And you're like, well, the tutorials say to use this tool. And you try to use the tool and you're like, what do I do next? Well, I'm a little bit confused. I'm blocked here. And so over time, you start asking questions to other people. Like, what would you do at this point? And you sort of build a mental map of, if it's this kind of problem, you need to use this tool in that particular way. And you build up the skills. And I think one of the things that, just to finish on that, I got pretty good at is translating that, like as I learned, writing it down so that I could teach others.
Yeah, there's no way. Like it would have taken really, if I look back at the amount of things that you taught me, it's not that much, but it would have taken me, I don't even know, a year probably to just figure out those like sequence of, okay, start with Perfetto, get a bird's eye view of what's happening. Then you can kind of, if it's still not obvious, okay, then you use the profiler and take a look at the flame chart, see what specific things are taking time, and like just those, don't run on a debug build. Make sure you run on a production build because that will just ruin everything. You have to use this specific flag and like all these like little things. and it would have taken, you know, a long time. And that knowledge is not that hard to pass on. We've kind of started a culture thing, I guess, in performance in restaurants now. And you know, we're always like, okay, if something seems suspicious that we're pushing up, it's like, okay, we're gonna profile this. We're gonna do a before and after the PR, and yeah, before and after the change, and see, okay, does this measure differently? And so it's definitely a good thing, and it doesn't really take that long, which is great.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think part of it, you know, there's always like with any sort of knowledge, the hard part is figuring out how do you. There's part which is acquiring the knowledge, and then there's repackaging it to make it easy to absorb for others. And you know, all of these mistakes, I've made them, and I'm like, okay, how do I guide you? Like I know exactly how an Android developer is going to react to a performance issue. I know that the first thing they're going to do is look at the changes recent. You know, what did we change recently? It's got to be there, right? Or like, and they're going to make a random change and see what happens. And like,
yeah.
and it doesn't do anything, or they're going to ship the change and you know, and ask the customers, is it good now? And they're like, no. And because I've done that.
Yeah. Or it only does it sometimes. You only see the latency sometimes, or you know.
That's the thing. It's the first step is reproducing, and it's often really hard. One of I think the reason I'm able to, the thing that was I learned years ago wasn't a mobile thing. Years ago, I watched a talk from someone called Kirk Pepedrin, I think. I'm not sure I pronounced the name right. He's a Java performance expert, and he was giving this talk, and he was talking about investigating performance issues in JVMs. And it stuck with me because he talked about the outside-in approach. He was like, what is the first thing you want to do? You want to jump to the code. Resist that. Don't do that. Outside in. Look at the outside view, the bird's eye view, figure out the shape of the problem, the kind of general location of it, and then you progressively zoom in. And you only look at the code to learn about things, not to try to say maybe it's here, maybe it's there, but to actually get more information about the shape of the architecture, the shape of the code. And then once you know what the problem is, you can go and fix exactly where it is.
Yeah. You're definitely right. The first instinct you have is jump in the code and try and look at it and be like, oh, is this slow? Oh, why is that slow? And you're like, and you know, there's thousands of lines depending on what portion you're looking. Best case scenario is like there's maybe like 50, but that's probably rare. And
our code base is without giving specific numbers, we know it's in the millions, right? And
I just mean like assuming you generally know where the problem is, which that's probably a wrong assumption. And then getting the bird's eye view, Perfetto is great, by the way. How did you find out about Perfetto? Like that's like the ideal bird's eye view tool.
That's a really good question. I think it's when I started using Macro Benchmark, maybe because Macro Benchmark uses Perfetto under the hood. So Macro Benchmark is this tool to write instrumentation tests that are going to run a scenario over and over and capture the performance of it. And what's really neat about it is that it's actually leveraging this profiling tool under the hood to actually get the numbers. The first few times, and I think I kept talking to Googlers about various problems, and they're like, try this with Perfetto. And I was like, this thing is like,
how?
This is horrible. Like, why do I do with this? I don't know what to do. I think one of the things that makes our Perfetto usage today much easier is that we spent a lot of time adding a lot of trace sections inside our application. So when you open Perfetto with the Square app today, you're going to see a lot of details about what's going on. If you do it with a normal app, it's just like, and so I think that's one of the big changes that makes that easier.
So how do you what do you do? So it's like essentially it sounds to me like you're saying you've inserted things into the code base that Perfetto looks at and can measure from, like measurement points, I guess you would say. What are those? How did you?
Good question. So there's an API on Android called trace. So you have trace.begin section and trace.end section, and those create spans. So the little color blocks that you see in Perfetto is like a name, And so the Android framework adds a few of those. So you would see choreographer.doFrame, you would see inflate, but beyond that, you don't see much. So one of the things that we did that made a huge difference is a giant hack, where we hack into the main thread loop, so that every message, every runnable that runs on the main thread, we call toString on it, and we put the duration of that runnable inside Perfetto. So you look at Perfetto and you're like, oh, here we're running this thing, like this runnable, and here we're running that runnable. And then you see, oh, and then there's a frame, So we did that for a lot of our executors, like background executors. We have the same deal. I've been recently more playing with adding the same thing for coroutines, which is a little bit more tricky. But the idea is the same, is that you would see this coroutine is executing at this point in time. And so once you have that, yeah.
So if I just spin up a coroutine in a workflow right now and want to, it will not show up in Perfetto?
Yeah, what you'll see is like if you're inside some broader thing like a workflow rendering, you would see that it's longer, but you wouldn't know the details of
right.
what's actually going on. So
right, okay.
when you look at profilers, there's sort of like two families of profilers. The Perfetto is, I forget what the name is, but essentially it's tracing. You say, I want to start a thing and now it's done, and within that span, I'm starting a subspan and it's done, and another subspan and it's done. So it requires a lot of instrumentation of your code. But on the plus side, it's very lightweight, and so it doesn't change the behavior of the app. If you look at a sampling profiler, the stuff that you see in Android Studio when you record a sampling profiler trace, where you can see all of the code that's executing. But you sort of have two issues. Number one, you don't actually see all of the code because all it's doing is taking stack traces at specific intervals. So the stuff that happens in between you don't see. But also doing that actually has an impact on the runtime. And so it could change the overall duration of things. And the third point, the point that really gets in the way, is that you see which code runs, but you don't see if it's actually running or not. And this is what Perfetto gives you. Perfetto helps you correlate, this span of things happened. Like we were trying to do a traversal, like lay out the UI. But during that time, I can see that this code, the main thread was scheduled to run on this CPU. And I can see that half the time we were doing IO, half the time we were blocking on a lock and we're not actually running. Or half the time we're waiting for one of the CPUs to be available, or all of our CPUs are busy. This is something that you see in Perfetto, and it helps you clearly identify the category of problem. You would not see that in a sampling profiler. You just see, oh, we're running this code. I don't know, and so.
Yeah. What did you mean? You just said something that confused me. What did you mean when you said you see the code running, but you don't know if it's running? What is?
Yeah. So let's say you have a method you're calling. You have a method. Let's call it, I don't know, render UI or whatever. And inside that method, you have a synchronized block, right? So you have a synchronized block. So there's a lock, and you're locking on it. And now let's say that you're invoking that method, but the lock is held by another thread that is doing something else. So when you look at the sampling profiler, all you're going to see is we're spending 10 milliseconds in that method.
Oh.
I don't know why. It must be doing a lot of work. When you look at Perfetto, you're like, oh, yeah, we're just doing nothing. The CPU, this is not even running on the CPU because we are blocked on this
doing
lock.
Stuff in another thread. Right. Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Yeah, interesting stuff. I find it a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing the performance investigations. It's like a little puzzle.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of being back in school. Not that I loved school, but just I don't know. I did physics, so it was kind of just like, oh, you have these weird problems, and you're like, I don't know what the hell is happening here, and you kind of just pick apart at it and try and figure it out. So,
yeah,
lots of fun.
That's I would say it's like half my job, or like a good. That's the part that performance is one thing, but generally problem solving and be like. The cases where we're like, oh, this is a mystery and we need to solve the mystery. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like super rewarding when you figure it out. and there's a big measurable impact, that's like you're like, hell yeah,
Yeah.
feels good.
Yeah, your team has done a lot of that, by the way. Very impressed.
Yeah, like I said, we've kind of started a culture shift sort of thing. Like Joel, I don't know if you know Joel Anderson. Yeah, he kind of was the one who learned it first, and then he taught me and Graham, and then now kind of everybody on the team knows a little bit. So I think it will be rare to see performance issues, like new performance issues, show up on restaurants because we're all very aware, and we all of us have a little bit of knowledge at least. So everybody's aware that if you're going to push something and we're like, I don't know, there might be like some weird performance thing, okay, let's profile it. And then I feel like a lot less will slip through the cracks for sure.
One of the big changes I would say is also just be beyond just learning the skill, is learning to pay attention to it. Like you're like looking at the app and, that's weird. Whereas before maybe you're like, oh, I don't know, it's the debug build. Sometimes it does things, and just move on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's more awareness because we know how to do something about it. Whereas before it would be like, even if there was something wrong, it's like, I don't know, I could go and look at like all of this code and probably get nowhere. So what's the point of that? But now it's like we're empowered, sort of thing. I was gonna say something, now I forgot. Oh yeah. So the Googlers, you mentioned that you got help from a lot of Googlers. How did that happen? Like I know I can't just reach out and say, hey, guy at Google, how do I do this?
You don't have you don't have the
I guarantee no one's gonna respond. Maybe if I get lucky on Twitter, maybe. But other than that, I don't know.
I think it's weird because I sort of have this thing where I can be very vocal on Twitter and very sometimes aggressive in a way, and I'm sorry, man, because sometimes it does make at the end of the day you do have to remember that there are people working at Google and other places, and so when you complain, there are actual software engineers that are receiving and having feelings about those complaints.
Build the thing that you're complaining about.
Yeah, well, but I think so there's a couple tricks. First of all, first trick, I'm French, so that I know that sounds weird to say that, but basically what happened is when I came to the US, I forget how exactly, but I sort of knew Romain Guy, who is like one of the Android legends at Google. But only sort of remotely, and we just started meeting up with a bunch of other French Android developers. So we have a group of friends, and now it's actually friends and family and kids, where we just meet every now and then. We used to just have a monthly French Android dinner where we just eat and talk shit about Android.
Would you talk in French, or would you talk?
Yeah, absolutely. And we always went to French restaurants, like usually nice French restaurants in San Francisco.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was really cool. But I think more recently, and so when you have a group of friends like that, of course it gives you access in a way, but you also it's friends. You don't want to be always asking like, hey, do this for me, do that for me, or like help me out with this, because then it doesn't feel right. So, but it was useful to kind of ask for more like curiosity, like, hey, what do you think about this problem? Like, do you know where in the code this kind of thing is? So that was one thing. I think the more recent thing has been Slack. There's like a Slack with a number of Android developers from across the world. It's a private Slack called the Android Study Group.
Yeah, you mentioned it before. I remember because I asked you some performance thing and you linked me this Slack, and I said I can't get in there.
Okay, well, so, yeah, it's a private Slack, and there's a whole like invitation process. But over the years, a number of Googlers have started appearing in there and getting some feedback, because it typically has some useful information. But if it wasn't there, I would probably, be like maybe on the Kotlin Slack or some other things. And I find that what I found is that as I was leveling up and having, like, I learned how to write. So there's two things, like people starting paying more attention to what I was saying, because I knew what I was doing, and also I learned how to frame things so that I was clear on like, this is the specific question that I have. And then over the years, I've built relationships with people at Google.
Yeah, that's something I've learned because Square was my first job. So, you know, I could code well enough, but there's a lot of other things to having a job. Probably like coding is like probably half, if that at all.
It goes down over time, but yeah.
Yeah, and it goes down over time. Yeah, communicating was a big one, like framing your question as specific as possible, since we're all, you know, communicating over Slack and things like that. So, yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. How long have you worked at Square? Actually, yeah, we kind of skipped the way I usually do these interviews, and we because I'm like very interested in the performance stuff and you know the libraries you've worked on. But now let's step back, and I want to talk about. I just asked you how long you worked at Square, but don't even start there. Let's go back further. You mentioned earlier that you were working on Android in 2010. When did you actually start working on Android, and how did you get into it? Did you go to school?
Yeah.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, good questions. I did. I mean, if we go way back, I started.
Let's go way back.
Okay, programming was middle school. I think I started with Quick Basic and then something called Dark Basic, which was really cool. It was 2D, 3D game programming with Basic, and it was fun. So I did some of that and some web stuff in high school. I went to college. When I went to college, I wasn't thinking about like. It took me a while to realize that software, like programming, could be a job. Like I was like, yeah, I guess I'll do I'll do studies because I kind of have to. It's how I felt about it. But I was already programming, but didn't really connect that I could be paid for that. That came later, and so through college, I guess I learned a few things, but I knew how to program somewhat. And my first job, my first internship, which was a 6 months internship, I was doing Java backend stuff. And then it was 2009, Android just it came out maybe a year before, or something like that. And just one of my managers asked me like, "Hey, do you want to? You're like doing well in your internship. Do you want to spend a week playing out with this technology Android?" Because he had a G1 and he was trying to see if he could start selling contracts. It was a consultancy, we would build apps and web stuff for other companies or go and work on site. And he was like, "Yeah, I just want to be able to have a demo that I can show to people and sell. Like, do you want to try it out?" And I did. That led into a contract with JC Deco, which is in cities you have ads everywhere, right? And those spaces are actually owned by private companies, and the cities usually rent the space to those companies, and those companies display ads in them. And the business model, sorry, I'm kind of going on a real long tangent, but the business models for those is that they go to see a city and they say, "Hey, so do you want like a bus stop? Do you want these nice lamps in your streets? We're going to give them to you for free, and in exchange, we get this advertisement space inside the city." So like Paris, New York, all of these cities have that. And as this contract reached their like 10-year limit, these private companies, they need to invent new ways for the cities to agree to grant them advertising space. And so at that point, when a year or two before I started to work on Android, this company, there's Clear Channel is the leader. I think JC Deco is like the second worldwide. They came up with the bicycle rental idea. So Vélib in France, it's basically, those places where you go and there's like 10 bikes, you put your badge and you leave with the bike and you put it somewhere else. And they did not make money on this, but they gave it to the city in exchange for advertising space. And so I built at the time an Android app for helping them manage this. So instead of, they had this huge Windows terminal that was really slow and wasn't really working well. And my first Android contract was like, let's make you a little Android phone. You can do da-da-da-da-da, tap it, and then unlock all the bikes and just, manage the thing. So I did that. Then I went back to server programming. And like I loved doing Android, but I felt that it wasn't serious engineering. Like I wouldn't be a real engineer if I didn't do like back-end programming. Like mobile was just like, a little bit like
a fun thing.
Like how people feel about JavaScript, like, oh, it's not serious.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, I get that analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I quit. I was bored. I quit. I started doing some Android full-time, building a keyboard app for a startup in Barcelona that was completely... I learned a lot because
Everything that starts with "I learned a lot."
Yeah, it was a shit show.
Generally bad.
It was bad. It's like some I don't know. I loved him, but like the CEO was a bit of a, I wouldn't say a scam artist, but like I was like, how did he get there? Like how did you?
What a scam artist.
But like, no, really nice dude. But he raised money. Building this alternate Android keyboard very early. That was before like SwiftKey and all of those Android keyboards, where you could switch into a mode where you'd see big tiles that were supposed to be ways to communicate until you'd hit a button and that would generate a chunk of text that you could pre-program. So it was a way to quickly type by pre-programming chunks of text.
Oh, I see.
And,
okay.
But like, I joined
before autocomplete existed.
Yeah, and like, but he had a PhD around how like ancient writing or something. I don't know. There was a whole story there. I joined, and then within a couple months, everybody had left, so it was just me. And I think the reason I stayed was because I was remote. Everybody was on site, and it was sort of driving them mad by changing his mind all the time, and I was fine. And so I was like, this is going nowhere. But he managed to get a deal from like some VP at Google that the app would be like in the featured. It was So mind you, this was like a 5,000 downloads app, and the response from Google was, okay, but you need to migrate the news style to ICS and do this and that and this. And we worked really hard to get it. And we were featured, and we went from 5,000 to like 2 million downloads like in a couple of days.
Wow.
So insane. And then we raised more funds. We had downloads, but it wasn't sticky at all. People just stopped using the app. But what I learned there, I used to think, well, if you build good software, people are going to use it. And then I realized, well, not exactly. The jump from 5,000 to 1 million wasn't because we built really good software. It was everything else. And so that was sort of like my first lesson.
Yeah, but still, if you build good software, like that's probably true. If you build good software, people probably will use it. That's probably not false.
Well, there's a lot of good software. One of the things is, if you want to build the right product, you have to have people to use it, and you have to find, you can't build a perfect thing by yourself on your own and then ship it to the world and masses will come. You have to build something, put it out there, get feedback, iterate, get more users, find the right type of users, and find problems that they have. There's so much going on, and
there's a process. Yeah,
and it's so much not about building what's in your mind and turning that into reality. It's so much of an iterative loop, and then having a way to get an influx of customers, such as being featured, makes such a change to like the direction of a company and all that.
Right.
And then I joined Square, and at that point,
so after the keyboard, was Square.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
2013, 10 years ago. I just reached 10 years.
Wow. Oh, 10 years. What did they give you for 10 years?
A badge on my profile.
Oh, that's it? No watch or
I think
dinner or something.
I think one of the executive assistants asked me what type of alcohol I like, so maybe there's something coming in the post, I think.
Okay.
But yeah.
How has Square like evolved over the years? Because it's been, you were there, I guess, since it started, really, right?
You'd think so, but no. I mean, it started in 2009. So I was 4 years in, and I joined. It was 500 people,
Wow.
and so which was already quite a bit, And within initially, it took me a few months to feel like I was comfortable with everybody, but the company doubled in size within a year. So a year later, we were like 1,000. So it was crazy growth, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't know anybody anymore. I joined. It was a single Android team and a single iOS team, and we were sort of like, PMs would work with us and we'd prioritize. So, all right, this group's going to do this, that group's going to do that, but single Android team. And then we had Gokul from Facebook join, and he was a senior PM, and he sort of led my organization, and he reorganized everything around that concept of like feature teams. Like you have a team it has an objective, like something that they're tackling. There's an iOS eng, an Android eng, a server eng, PM, design, all that. And so that was a big change. And then I saw a lot of reorgs, the company growing from 1,000 to 2,000 to 10 plus today.
Yeah, what is it today? It's 10. Like
I'm
10,
saying,
is it 15?
I'm saying 10 plus because I don't know what's the latest official number that we can communicate. And
yeah, I don't even know if I've never seen an internal number. I have no idea.
There is
I only know what I've Googled.
There is a wiki page with everything that you are allowed to say at a given point in time. So if you ever want to have the right official numbers, you can go there.
Okay, that's good to know, because I do these podcasts and I really don't know what I can and can't say, but I'm generally careful.
I've noticed. Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I'm generally careful. Even like interviews, I try and only say things that I know are public. That's public information. And then anything else. Yeah, Vasily had a bunch of questions for me last time, and I'm like, not 100% sure. And I really don't want them.
You don't want to get in trouble.
I don't want to give them a reason to like, hey, Mitch, you got to stop doing podcasts, And then the worst case scenario is I just get fired. But I think more than likely it would just be a, hey, Mitch, you have to stop doing podcasts, which would suck also.
But they might ask you to send all the podcasts to Coms for review.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually read that. We had this. I shouldn't even say this because if somebody's watching, they're gonna. I'm not gonna say it. I'll maybe tell you after if I forget. So, yeah. Okay. Let's. What do we got left? We got 15 minutes. Let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, your current work at Square. Whatever you can talk about, anyway. Like how many hours a day do you work typically?
2.
You're what?
We're definitely cutting that out. No, just kidding.
Well, I already said earlier that you were sort of abusing the work from home and hanging out with your kids in the morning and talking to me on Slack. So
yeah,
2 hours a day.
I mean, I wouldn't say abusing because the way I look at it,
I know I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm kidding. Joke.
Yeah, I know. It's basically I typically start around 9 a.m. And I stop being at the keyboard at the laptop around 5. And I most often don't eat lunch. I just say, just keep on straight. And so that's sort of like my hours during the day. But what you'll find is that I work some more when the kids are down, sometimes, not every day. Sometimes on the weekend, and there's a lot happening on my phone as well. Because a lot of my job today is like 10, 20 parallel Slack conversations with various people. People asking for advice about something, or me nudging someone or asking a question, and like till I get that answer, that specific thread is kind of on hold, and I'll get back to that later. And so I don't like, of course I do need my laptop, but there's a huge part of the job that is just Slack. And so for that, I don't really need a laptop.
Really? So you do a lot of work on your phone then?
Yeah. Well, less than I used to, because they blocked access to like GitHub and some internal tooling from the phone, which is sad because I'd be able to review a PR from the phone, or do or dive into a crash, or look at some logs, and be like, which was, on the one hand, not ideal, and I'm not prescribing that because it's not best for like work-life balance. But it also meant that, I could, leave on a trip early and work from the car or whatever. So I found I'm not very organized as a person, so I tend to go like, and so this works well for me.
Yeah, I hate being on Slack on my phone. Just like the inefficiency of it really bothers me. Like hitting, you know, using my thumbs instead of my 10 fingers. I don't know. I don't know if I could, but maybe, I don't know, maybe in 10 years that I would change because all of the things I do are mostly on Slack. I have
It
no idea.
forces you to type less, so less
I
words, more
guess,
efficiency.
true,
Very
true.
direct. I'm known to have a direct style.
Yeah, I like the way you communicate. I could see how it could be perceived as rude for
Yeah,
sure, but I like it.
I French.
I can tell what you want like immediately, which is the best, I think. But I think I also communicate like that. So, do you ever wish that you did something else? Do you ever like is was software? You said I think you said earlier that you went to school just because you thought you needed to go to school and you weren't really sure about becoming a software engineer. Did you ever want to do something else?
Um, Sometimes I think about that, but I enjoy baking a lot. I do a lot of like
Oh
baking
yeah,
at
I see
home.
your
Yeah.
Instagram. Yeah.
um, and so that's really fun. I like making nice looking things that taste good. But I don't think I'd like doing that like at 5 in the morning, like 100 units of something every day, or like it's hard work. And I think as a software engineer, like we work hard, but it's all like in your mind in a way, you know.
Mm.
And so yeah, even if I retire today, which is something that's on the horizon because we're talking about at some point, a couple of years, going back to France, and uh, not necessarily needing to work for a while. But I'm like, and that idea is both interesting but also scary because I'm like, what would I do if I had all this time? And I think I'd
Yeah,
probably still be coding. And so, um,
probably.
yeah, because
I
it's
think about that too.
yeah, it's like it's a passion thing, right? It's this. Well, I could do with removing some of the less interesting aspects of the job, that's for sure. Um, but the problem solving is really the part that, and so I guess you could do problem solving in other areas. But I'm really like hooked onto that. Like sometimes it's not like right now. There's some parts of it that's not exactly software engineering. It's like let's figure out what the problems are in this organization and why people are shipping software that has bugs and not fixing the bugs and how everybody's feeling stretched and what's going on there, right? So you could say, oh, that's not like software engineering, but it's very much problem solving. It's like you talk to a bunch of people, you're trying to understand the incentives, where people come from, what they're trying to do, what's happening, and you sort of like reason about that as a system. So software engineering kind of leads to system thinking, and system thinking can be applied to everything in life, including how teams work, how organizations work, and that kind of stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, I can't see you just doing nothing. There's no way. Because I couldn't imagine myself doing it either. Like I've thought about, because it's as a software engineer, it's very realistic to retire. Like if you start working at like I don't know 25, it's very realistic to retire at 40. You as long as you live reasonably and you are responsible with your money, like it's very realistic to retire at like 40. And I've thought about that, just like what that would be like, and I just don't. I think that's the fast track to depression, honestly.
Yeah.
Like if you think it sounds great, but it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I think like most people who end up in this field are people who they like um mental stimulation because you're solving problems all day. Like someone who's attracted to this job is not somebody who doesn't like to use their brain a lot. I don't think it'd be good.
Yeah.
But
It's
but good luck to you.
Thank you. I've thought about that. Yeah, like one thing I've noticed is if I go on vacation after like a week or two, I usually like get angsty of like I'm missing the problem solving part. Uh,
That's how I feel, right? So I'm on the maternity leave. I'm like I literally it's pretty good, but I feel like every day pretty much I'm like, I could go back to work. I could go back to work. I've been working
Yeah.
on like this personal project. I built a website for my friends and I play poker tournaments every month. We play one a month generally, and I built a website to track the like analytics, and it's yeah. So I
Nice.
have been doing something. It's pretty cool, yeah. And but now I'm sort of like nearing the end of the things that I need to do on the website, and I'm like, now what am I gonna do?
Yep, exactly. And people are like, if you retire, you can travel the world, which I think it's true and it's amazing. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I like
Yeah,
going
me
on
either.
vacation, but I also like being at home. Actually, I'm very and I
Yeah,
like my
same.
habits and all that. And so yeah.
Your routine, yeah, like you get like I like my routine. It's I going on vacation. You said I think a week was your magic number.
Yeah, 2 weeks, one and a
Okay,
half,
yeah,
really.
yeah. If you count travel time, 2 weeks is too long for me. Generally, I find 8 days is that's the amount. And that's including travel time. So it's really only like 6 days at the destination, and then I feel the same as what you described. It's just like okay, I've had enough of this. I could go home. Okay, what else do I want to ask you? I got a bunch of stuff, but we got
I I have a question for you. So you join Square, not knowing necessarily what to expect, but having, I guess, the public image of what Square is. So what was the difference between what you expected and what you saw, maybe?
um. What an interesting question. I have not thought about that before. Well, let's just start saying things and hopefully the answer will pop out somehow. I applied at Square. Square was the only place I applied. I only applied to one location. The reason why I applied at Square was because there is famous people like you. Oh, here, my fingers are on the screen. Famous people like you. Um, some of the best libraries in the Android ecosystem were developed by people at Square and still maintained by Square. I knew a few people who worked there, and I asked them about the job, and they said the work life balance was great. You can look up the pay. The pay is good. Yeah, and every person I talked to, every single one of them said it was great. Like nobody said anything bad, and this was like off the record stuff, and that just really surprised me. Because who doesn't have something bad to say about the place they work? Like if you work somewhere long enough, inevitably you're gonna have things that you don't like about it. Like how no matter how big or small they are, there's probably gonna be something. Okay, so that's why I applied there. Yeah, what did I think? I didn't really have any expectation because I never had a job.
Oh yeah, right. So you're sort of special in that way, yeah. Um,
I never. I actually had a job, but it was when I first came out of school and I was working in IT. It wasn't. It was like it was not comparable, and it was also a terrible place to work. So
so it's a kind of
I had
low bar in that,
extremely
yeah.
yeah extremely low, like my only thing I had ever worked, or the only place I had ever worked at. Yeah, so pretty much I had no expectation, I think. So everything was coming. One thing I could tell you that I was worried about though was what kind of like a manager or team I was gonna end up on, because that can really make or break the job, I think, because the work is, if you work at a big company, the work is probably going to be good work. Like it's going to be stimulating. You're probably going to do things that you should probably aren't going to be doing things that you shouldn't be doing and things like that. But the team you end up on and the manager you have can totally dismantle everything for you. Um, so that I was kind of worried about, but that turned out great. Like I get along very well with all of the people on my team. Manager's awesome. I feel like he's the best manager ever, but I also don't have any
For
experience,
the
so I don't.
for the viewers, we're right into the feedback period time. So Mitch is feeding some content to his manager right now. But just kidding.
I know I'm on maternity. I don't have to
Oh
do
right.
that. Yeah, I get to skip that whole
Nice.
cycle. No feedback from me. But yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting.
I didn't really answer your question.
No, but it's cool. I like to ask that because Square has it's visible. Like when I joined Square, I didn't know what it was doing as a company. I only knew about the open source stuff. And so there are a number of people joining or applying who don't really know what Square is about. And so, and then like the reality is that most of our engineers don't really do open source stuff. But it's not because we're telling them no. It's because like you typically do open source if you're interested in it, and if you and it's sort of an emulation stuff. Like when you have someone in your team doing open source, you might start picking it up.
Yeah.
And so we're actually thinking about ways to get more engineers at Square to engage in that. And the other thing, it was kind of the same for me. Like 10 years ago, I joined because of of Jesse Wilson and Jake Wharton and Bob Lee at the time, who were like my big idols. And I never worked with them. It's interesting. Like I joined 10 years ago. In 10 years.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you about that.
Yeah.
I forgot.
We never worked together. I interact quite a lot with Jesse because Jesse's a great person to talk to, like exchange ideas with. Like I'm like, I have this interesting idea, and he's gonna go, "Oh no, it's dumb," and then we're gonna have a back and forth, and and like he's got this kind of contrarian approach to everything, and at the beginning I was like, okay, he's shutting me down, but it's actually a great way to sort of like, he always thinks about things differently than I do, so he's a great person for me to talk to. But then I realized that I learned so much, and so little of it had to do with software engineering directly, like actual coding. Like I learned about, I've always had the skill, like one of the basic skills that I acquired early in my career is read the source code. Like anything you find, just go, it's not your code, it's a library, doesn't matter, just go read the source code. And because it's Android, because there's a lot of open source, it's really easy to go really deep and read the source code. So that I had. But like at Square, I learned about user experience, products, business, teams, organizations, how people work together, and all of these little things that you pick up as a company grows, and as you get interested in them, and all of the leadership issues, and like what does a manager have to do, and what do they deal with, and and so it's super interesting to start learning all these things because. And stay in IC. I wasn't a manager for IC is individual contributor. I was a manager for 8 months. It was fine, but I wasn't excited about the job. So I was like, I need to be excited by my job. So I went back to IC. But the thing about being an IC that's been a manager, that's seen a lot of growth, that's seen a lot of things, is that you're kind of, your hands are free to go and find the right place to do a little thing that's going to have a high leverage. Maybe it's writing a guide. Maybe it's talking to a very senior lead. Maybe it's surfacing a problem in the right way. But I find that like really interesting, like how you can think of teams and organizations, software like as little like systems, right? And you're like, where do I like poke so that something, the butterfly effect, something happens down the line.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, I had no plans to become a manager. I know myself well enough to know that is a bad idea. Well, I mean, it'd probably be fine, just like you're describing. It would be fine, but I like to code, and
I mean,
the like poke here and see what happens factor.
Yeah, I think the manager part, it's still important to go. Well, I'm not saying everybody should do it, but I think it still taught me a few things, and it made me more aware of the reality of managers, and like it both means that I now have very clear expectations on what managers should do, but also that I know how hard it is and like everything that they have to deal with, I had annual planning. Like you need to come up with. It's hard for for as a person to be like, all right, we need to come up with a plan. What are we going to do next year?
It's an impossible job.
Yeah, it's really hard.
The estimations, it's an impossible job.
Well, I was pretty good at that because I was like, leave me alone. So I was like, all right, well, it's easy. We want to do kind of these 4 things. We have this many people. So we're just going to divide the available time by the number of people. And that's the size of every task. Done. So I just... it's... I
guess.
Don't say it too loud. But for the most part, I was like, I'm happy with the team I have. And we know... the big areas we need to invest in, all we need, and I have really good people. So I just need to be left alone and we'll deliver great stuff. So that's why I kind of like...
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable assumption, I guess, then. All I did, I just made huge estimations because I had no idea. They'd hand you this thing and I'm like, I don't know how long it's going to take. And I just made like what I thought it was going to be, and then I doubled it, and then that was what I estimated. I don't know if that's a good idea. I think it's way worse to be low. So I just thought go high.
Yeah, it's a thing, but then what happens is it's a system, right? There's dynamics. So as you inflate things, people look at that and are like, oh, but obviously they're inflating. So they counter it and they remove some buffer somewhere else. And now you have the same problem again, right? It's generally good to, that's why estimations is meant to be very broad. It's like, is this a week, a month, a quarter, a year of work? That's kind of the rough, that's how you want to think about that. And then when you talk about a yearly plan anyway, and then you go, all right, this is kind of the plan. And we're doing that just so we identify the order of things we roughly want to do it and which team is depending on what. Once we're done with that, we don't need to follow the plan. We mostly need to focus on the work that's just ahead and figure that part out.
Right. Yeah. So that you're not blocking. That's the main thing. Like if you have one team waiting for something.
But also you don't want teams constantly rushed to be like, oh, we're 1 week behind on schedule, so we can't write the right code. We have to write shitty code, and we can't write tests because there's no time. And which I've seen happen. So I'm like very careful. I'm like, do the plan and then don't follow the plan.
I've so far at Square, I've seen that not happen. There's been the opportunity to write shitty code, and my manager and my team have been like, no, we're pushing the date back because we're not going to write.
That's what you want to happen. This is great.
Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised because this was actually fairly early when I had joined, and something wasn't ready, and the manager and plus a couple people on the team were like advocating very aggressively to say, no, we're going to push it back. We're not going to try and write some shitty code and slap it in. That's not the way. Just push it back.
Love it.
Yeah, I thought that was great. Okay, so that's it. We probably should go. I have to go look after my 2-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
Who?
Good luck.
Yes, we're going to go visit my mom who has new puppies. So that's very exciting.
Nice.
Yes,
Nice.
But it was fun. It was great to talk to you. I look forward to working on whatever thing I need your help with.
Anything.
In the future.
I'm just a Slack away. So yeah.
And anything else you want to say before we shut her down here?
No, not really. I don't know.
I'll put your Twitter down below.
Yeah, Twitter.
So
I'm also on Mastodon, but like I kind of go back and forth. I don't know yet what I'm going to do is that.
Yeah, I don't really use that. It was kind of I found it complicated. Like I downloaded the app and I'm like, okay, well, there's all these places. Where do I go?
Yeah, well, there's an Android one. But yeah, I think dev.social or something like that. But because there's not the same people, you don't get the same quality of content, and so it's not as interesting, I guess. But yeah, no, I guess use Square open source libraries. I don't know. I would say people should join Square, but we don't have that many. We don't have that many open spots right now, right? So it's
but we haven't done any layoffs, which is surprising.
Yeah,
I just asked my manager yesterday because I've been gone for a month or 2 months, month and a half or something, and I asked him if there had been any layoffs because I know Facebook just did a second round of layoffs, and there has been no layoffs at Square somehow.
Do you know why?
Which is very surprising. I don't know why.
Well, okay. The first thing, which is going to sound like bullshit, is because Square is a great company, right? I think it's part of that, but it's also that. So there's a couple things. It's somewhat easy to explain. The core of the Square's business is the Square point of sale. It's building tools for small businesses, like real life tools, not online tools. So as the pandemic happened, a lot of people stopped going to their small businesses and they started being online more. So all the companies that have a lot of business online, their business grew and they hired for that. And you could say they didn't anticipate that it would stop at some point and they mishired and they that wasn't the right thing to do. Square, on the other hand, because we were basically serving all these small businesses that were very much at risk during the pandemic, we were very, we did not hire too much. We tried to reduce costs throughout the pandemic, and so we got creative. We didn't overspend at all, and so when the situation reverses, we're fine. It's not like we're we have a lot of money to spend and whatever, but we don't need to fire
Right.
people because we didn't
Yeah.
hire left and right, and generally Square has always had a very, like, from a financial standpoint, we pay very close attention to where we invest and how, and so it's not like this. When I joined Square, we were spending a lot more money on random shit than we are like throughout the years. I joined. You could pay $1 to get a 1 hour massage at the office, and there was food all the time, and it was really nice. Like, it's interesting. Like, you join early, and then the benefits just sort of go down. I don't complain though. It was nice while it lasted, but it was a bit ridiculous and also
Irresponsible.
Yeah,
Irresponsible spending.
it was the trend of the time too, right? Like, every single startup needed to do that, but it was also, it wasn't fair because, like, if you're not working at the office all the time, then those benefits don't really apply for you, right? And so, yeah, I think today is more fair and also more reasonable in terms of spending.
Cool. Well, that's what I had, like, that's what I thought intuitively, that Square probably just didn't like overspend, but I had no information to back up that assumption. But that was the only thing that made sense to me, because at the end of the day, it's a company and they're going to do what they have to do to make profits and grow.
We have to also talk a bit about, I'm sorry, it's going beyond the time we had allotted, but a lot of the firing, it's two things, right? It's mismanagement, it's people overhiring, not realizing what was going on, what was going to happen. But it's also, one thing I've realized over the years is people in position of power, the VPs and the CEOs and the VCs, the investors, they're not necessarily smart people. They're not incredibly fantastic people. They're people like you and me, or dumber, and they lucked into something. Not all of them, but a number of them. And there's a lot of that. We just saw it with the Silicon Valley Bank, like the SVB Bank, kind of crashing into the ground because they all pulled out at the same time. They created a bank run for themselves. I'm talking about investors here, or I guess VCs, and founders. But the general point here is that there's a huge network effect, and sheep effect of following what everybody else is doing. So when everybody else is crazy hiring, we gotta hire. Oh, everybody else is firing, we gotta fire. And so there's a bit of that going on as well. There is some economic reality, but there's also some like, oh, let's just do like everybody else.
Yeah, it's like, you're just afraid to be the one to make a mistake, so you do what everybody else is doing, sort of thing. Okay, well, again, it was fun.
Yeah, same.
And maybe one day we'll do it again.
Yeah.
I had more questions, but I like to keep it, and I think an hour is good.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, have a good one.